A few years ago, I was checking all the boxes. A decent job, a full schedule, family responsibilities, social obligations. I was doing everything a functional adult was supposed to do. But at night, when everything went quiet, I felt this strange heaviness I couldn't name. Not sadness, exactly. Not depression. Just empty. Like I had forgotten something important, but didn't know what it was. That feeling didn't come from failure. It came from misalignment. From living in rhythm with expectations, not with truth. From being productive, but not present. From saying yes to everything, except the one voice that mattered, my own. I didn't need more motivation. I needed meaning. I didn't need to move faster. I needed stillness. And that's when I found the Stoics, not as distant philosophers, but as steady companions. They didn't offer quick hacks. They offered clarity. They taught me that discipline could be quiet, that peace wasn't passive, and that purpose wasn't found. It was remembered. This video is for anyone who's ever felt that silent ache in the middle of a full life. I'll share 8 soul-deep truths that help me rebuild from the inside out. Each truth pulled me closer to who I really was. And maybe they'll do the same for you. So stay with me. Subscribe if it resonates. And if you've ever carried that same invisible weight, share it in the comments. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. 1. Your soul needs meaning, not just productivity. I used to think checking every box on my to-do list meant I was winning at life. Wake up early, get through emails, handle the meetings, pay the bills, be present for everyone who needed me. I moved with urgency, stayed ahead of deadlines, and didn't let a single responsibility fall through the cracks. But even on the days I finished everything, I'd lie in bed at night and feel something I couldn't explain. Something hollow. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't burnout. It was a quiet emptiness that no amount of accomplishment could fill. It took me years to realize that I wasn't tired from doing too much. I was tired from doing too little of what actually mattered to me. Productivity had become a mask, a way to feel in control, to stay busy enough not to feel lost. But meaning? That had quietly slipped through the cracks. And the truth is, no matter how many things you get done in a day, if none of them connect to something deeper, you'll always feel like you're running in place. The Stoics warned us about this kind of life, one that looks full but feels empty. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet wrote to himself in the margins of war and politics about the danger of wasting one's soul on trivial pursuits. He didn't tell himself to accomplish more. He told himself to return to his purpose. Because a life without purpose isn't just unfulfilling, it's disorienting. You wake up with noise, move through the day with pressure, and fall asleep without peace. You don't need more hours in your day. You need direction in the ones you already have. But purpose doesn't shout. It doesn't demand your attention the way emails or bills do. The purpose is quiet. It waits in the background like a loyal companion until you finally stop and ask why. Why am I doing this? Why am I saying yes to everything except myself? Why does success feel so weightless, like it slips through my fingers the moment I catch it? For me, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just me, sitting in my car in a parking lot, realizing I couldn't remember the last time I did something just because it made me feel alive. Not for money, not for approval, not for responsibility, just for meaning. That realization didn't change everything overnight, but it changed something inside me permanently. I stopped measuring my days by how much I got done and started asking whether what I was doing deserved my time at all. You can feel this shift too. Not by quitting everything, but by pausing long enough to evaluate what you've been chasing. Is it yours? Or did you inherit it from fear, from expectation, from someone else's idea of success? The Stoics teach us to examine life with honesty and to shed what isn't essential. If a task doesn't nourish your soul, if it only feeds your ego or numbs your fear, it may not be worth your energy. The cost of busyness without meaning is steep. Anxiety, emotional numbness, even despair. Meaning isn't found in a job title, a clean inbox, or a perfect routine. It's found in the intention behind your actions. It's in the way you speak to someone when you're tired. It's in how you choose to spend your quiet moments. It's in what you're willing to say no to. Because you finally remembered what you're saying yes to. And meaning doesn't need to be grand. You don't need to save the world. You just need to live in a way that honors what matters to you. Maybe it's showing up for your kids with presence instead of pressure. Maybe it's creating something that no one else sees, but that reflects your inner truth. Maybe it's learning to sit in silence without reaching for your phone and letting your own thoughts rise to the surface, unfiltered. This kind of life doesn't advertise itself. It won't impress everyone, but it will feel like peace. And peace, unlike productivity, doesn't come and go. It settles in you. It becomes a home. When you choose meaning over motion, you stop sprinting toward a life you were never meant to live. You stop chasing approval from people who don't understand your values. You stop letting the world define your worth by how fast you move. That's why your soul needs meaning. Because without it, everything else is noise. It's why so many people feel tired even when their bodies are rested. Why do they succeed and still feel small? Why do they keep going but forget where they're headed? Purpose brings gravity to your steps. It slows you down, not out of laziness, but out of precision. You stop reacting. You start living. And this is where Stoicism becomes more than theory. It becomes a quiet revolution. You return to what matters. You let go of what distracts. You say no to urgency and yes to essence. This isn't about abandoning your life. It's about returning to it with clarity, with intention, with soul. Because doing more won't fix what meaninglessness erodes. But doing what matters, even if it's small, can rebuild everything from the inside out. So if you've been busy but not fulfilled, surrounded but not seen, successful but still empty, maybe the question isn't, what should I do next? Maybe the question is, what do I need to stop doing so I can start living true? 2. Your soul needs clarity, not control. There was a time when I believed that peace came from managing everything well. That if I could just organize my schedule perfectly, say the right things at the right time, keep people happy, and anticipate every possible outcome, then maybe, just maybe, I would finally feel calm. But I was wrong. The more I tried to control life, the more anxious I became. The tighter I gripped, the more it all slipped through my hands. And no matter how hard I worked to hold it together, there was always something unpredictable waiting just around the corner. I think about my mother often when I reflect on this. She was a woman of quiet strength, but also someone who carried everyone's future on her shoulders. She worried about every child, every possible path we could take, every mistake we might make. Her love made her vigilant, but that vigilance exhausted her. And for years, she believed that being a good mother meant never letting go, until one day, something changed. I remember her telling me, calmly, with the softness of someone who had lived enough to understand, I can't control how your life turns out. I just hope you remember who you are. That moment stayed with me, because it wasn't surrender, it was clarity. She had finally seen the difference between what belonged to her and what didn't, and that is where peace begins. Clarity is knowing what's yours to carry and what isn't. It's not passive, it's precise. It doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop clinging. Control demands certainty. Clarity only asks for truth. And in a world that constantly shifts, where people change and outcomes surprise us, the truth is more dependable than any plan. The Stoics understood this distinction with brutal honesty. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he couldn't change what others said or did, only how he responded. Epictetus taught that external events were outside our command, but our thoughts, our judgments, our actions, those were ours entirely. Control to them was an illusion. But clarity was power. Because when you stop trying to fix what isn't yours, you free yourself to focus on what truly is. This matters now more than ever. We live in a time where control is sold as a solution. Track everything, plan everything, control every outcome. But it never ends. And instead of feeling safer, we feel more overwhelmed, more rigid, more afraid to let anything slip. Because the moment something breaks the plan, we feel like we've failed. But life was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be understood. When you chase control, you become reactive. You flinch at every twist. You tighten at every change. But when you choose clarity, you respond with calm. You see the whole picture. You know what's yours to manage and what's simply part of the weather passing through. So how do we move from control to clarity? It starts with a question few of us ask often enough. Is this mine? Is this worry mine to solve, or am I carrying someone else's burden out of guilt or habit? Is this conflict something I must fix, or something I can observe without owning? Is this pressure coming from my values, or from fear of being judged? When you begin to ask these questions honestly, something shifts. You start releasing instead of reacting. You start responding instead of micromanaging, and you begin to breathe in spaces where you used to tense up. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the decision to stop wasting strength on what can't be changed, so you can invest it where it counts, on your own character, your own peace, your own direction. That's not avoidance, that's focus. That's discipline. It doesn't mean you don't lead. It doesn't mean you stop showing up for people. It means you learn the boundaries between compassion and control. You stop thinking you can prevent every mistake and instead help others grow through their own. You stop demanding perfection from circumstances and start cultivating steadiness within yourself. The Stoics never promised that life would be simple, but they did promise that we can choose how we carry it. And that clarity about what we can shape and what we must release is the beginning of strength. So if you're exhausted, if you feel like life keeps slipping out of your hands no matter how much you try to hold it together, pause. Don't try to fix everything. Don't try to grip tighter, just get clear. Ask yourself, what is actually mine in this moment? What am I trying to control that was never mine to begin with? Sometimes the hardest thing isn't doing more, it's doing less, but with focus, with presence, with the humility to say, this is enough, this is what I can hold, and the rest I release. When you live this way, peace stops being something you chase, it becomes something you carry, quietly, constantly, and from that stillness, you move. Not with panic, but with purpose. Not with fear, but with calm. Because you were never meant to manage the whole world. You were meant to master your own. 3. Your soul needs alignment, not applause. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from doing everything right in the eyes of the world and still feeling lost in your own skin. You follow the rules, make people proud, meet expectations, and yet something feels wrong. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded at being someone you never truly were. The applause is loud, but alignment is silent. And too often we chase the first while starving for the second. No one teaches you how dangerous approval can be when you're not anchored in who you are. It looks like success, it sounds like praise, but it feels like a slow erasure of self. You laugh when you're supposed to, you nod when it's expected, you say yes even when your gut says no. And each time, you move a little further from your center. Until one day, the life you're living no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the image others have clapped for. I've been there. I've walked into rooms where I knew exactly what version of myself people wanted to see. So I gave them that. Polished, agreeable, impressive. But I would leave those rooms feeling strangely empty, like I had traded something sacred for something hollow. And the truth is, I had traded authenticity for approval. I had chosen to be liked over being real. And the cost of that choice wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. It drained something deep in me that I didn't even know had a name. The Stoics had a name for it. They called it alignment with nature, not the trees or the stars, but your inner nature, your character, your principles, your reason. Living in alignment means your actions match your values. It means your outer life doesn't betray your inner truth. It means you stop performing and start living with quiet honesty. That's not easy, especially in a culture that rewards image over integrity, where social validation feels like currency, and applause comes faster than self-respect. But applause fades, and the echo of who you could have been if you had just listened to yourself, that lingers. That's what keeps people up at night, not what others thought of them, but what they lost trying to please everyone else. When you choose alignment, you lose the spotlight, but you find clarity. You stop waiting for permission and begin building a life that actually fits. You learn to be still when others rush, to say no when silence feels safer, to speak truth even if your voice shakes. And with every decision rooted in who you really are, you become less dependent on how others react. That's not arrogance, that's emotional independence. That's what Stoicism trains you for. To act from principle, not popularity. To seek wisdom, not applause. To live for the approval of your conscience, not the crowd. Because when you're aligned, even if no one claps, your soul breathes easier. You don't need to be seen to feel whole. Of course, this shift comes with discomfort. You'll disappoint people, you'll confuse them, you'll lose the praise you once relied on. But in return, you gain something more valuable: respect for yourself. And when you respect yourself, you make different choices. You leave rooms where you're not heard. You stop justifying your boundaries. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. You become rooted, not stubborn, but stable, not loud, but clear. You move through the world with quiet strength, knowing you're not here to impress, but to live truthfully. You become immune to manipulation because you no longer need to be liked. You've chosen something better. You've chosen alignment. This shift isn't loud. You won't post about it. No one will throw a party for you, but you'll feel it. In your breath, in your mornings, in the way you stop apologizing for existing as you are. In the way your decisions begin to reflect your actual values, not borrowed beliefs, not inherited guilt, not external scripts. If you feel lost, if you've been performing for too long, if you've forgotten what your own voice sounds like, pause. You don't need to win anyone over. You need to come home to yourself. And that begins by asking, what parts of my life feel true? What parts feel performed? Then, quietly, slowly, choose truth. Even if it costs you applause, because the applause will fade. But your alignment, that's what will hold you together when nothing else does. That's what will anchor you when success feels empty, when others misunderstand, when the world grows too loud. You won't need to shout, you'll just need to stay steady. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to become anything more. You simply have to return to what matters, to what's honest, to what's yours. That's alignment, and that's where your soul stops chasing and finally begins to rest. 4. Your soul needs stillness, not more noise. The mind doesn't break from chaos outside. It breaks when the noise becomes so constant that it drowns out the voice within. When you can't hear your own thoughts anymore, not because you have none, but because you've given your attention to everything else. There's always something playing, pinging, flashing, demanding. Every second is filled, every pause avoided, as if silence itself has become threatening. As if being alone with your own mind might reveal something you're not ready to face. But stillness isn't absence, it's presence. It's not about doing nothing, it's about doing the essential. Noise, in all its forms, distracts you from what matters, from what hurts, from what's unresolved, from what you've buried, because facing it would mean finally choosing a different life. But there is no clarity in the noise. There is no healing in distraction. If you never sit still, you never stop spinning, and the faster you spin, the more lost you become. Stoic philosophy doesn't celebrate busyness. It respects order. It honors calm. The Stoics knew that peace wasn't found in avoidance, but in attention. Not in reacting to everything, but in responding only to what matters. They didn't seek to fill time, they sought to master it. And they did that by learning to sit with themselves. Without a screen, without a task, without needing to be anywhere but exactly where they were. Stillness is not laziness, it's discipline. It takes strength to shut out the noise when the world is built to keep you stimulated. But the soul doesn't grow in noise, it grows in quiet, it deepens in silence. That's where reflection lives. That's where self-correction begins. That's where you finally ask the questions you've been avoiding, not for the sake of answers, but for the sake of honesty. What am I chasing? Who am I trying to impress? What part of my life looks full but feels hollow? These questions can't be answered with podcasts, background music, or endless scrolling. They can only be heard when the volume is turned down and the pace is slowed. Stillness gives you the space to hear the truth without it needing to compete for attention. And yet, stillness is the one thing people avoid most, because it exposes, it strips away the layers of performance. It reveals what's unresolved. But that exposure is where healing starts. It's how you move from distraction to direction, from anxiety to clarity, from surface living to soulful awareness. If your days feel crowded but your heart feels distant, it's not more input you need, it's less. You don't need another podcast episode, another headline, another feed refresh. You need time to be still long enough to feel what's actually going on inside you. Maybe grief, maybe exhaustion, maybe an old dream you've been pushing down. None of it can speak unless the noise stops. You can't reconnect with yourself if you're constantly pulled into everyone else's urgency. And urgency, for most of us, is an addiction. A way to avoid facing the truth that the life we've built might not be aligned with who we really are. So we move fast, we keep the music on, we check our phones out of habit, not need, and we wonder why peace feels like something distant, like something only other people get to feel. But peace isn't found, it's chosen. And it begins by subtracting, by silencing the unnecessary so the essential can surface. By recognizing that your energy doesn't belong to every conversation, every notification, every passing opinion. The soul doesn't need to be constantly stimulated. It needs room to breathe, room to settle, room to remember what actually matters. And the surprising truth is, nothing outside of you will grant that space. The world won't hand it to you. You have to claim it. You have to protect it like something sacred, because it is. 5 minutes of undisturbed silence can teach you more about yourself than 5 hours of passive consumption. In that silence, you realize you're not as confused as you thought. You're just distracted. The Stoics trained themselves to listen before they reacted, to pause before they acted, to seek understanding before judgment. That's not just emotional control, it's mental clarity. And clarity is born from stillness, not from panic, not from pace, from pause. If your life feels loud right now, that's okay. You're not weak for wanting quiet. You're not broken for needing space. You're human. And the soul doesn't thrive in chaos. It survives it. But it heals in stillness. It resets in quiet. And the longer you stay with yourself, the more you remember what you never truly lost, just forgot in the noise. So the next time the world demands your attention, let it wait. Turn down the volume. Sit in the silence. Let the discomfort pass. And watch what returns. Not drama, not urgent, but something quieter, something wiser, something that sounds a lot like you. 5. Your soul needs boundaries, not burnout. Helping others is noble. Carrying them is not. There's a difference between kindness and overextension, between support and self-neglect. And the soul can feel the difference, especially when it's running on empty. You show up for everyone. You say yes when you mean no. You swallow your frustration, mask your exhaustion, and keep pouring from a cup that's been dry for far too long. But no one sees that part. They just see you holding everything together, unaware that what they're praising might be your slow unraveling. There was a time when I thought the more I gave, the more I mattered. That being needed was the same as being valued. So I took the calls, answered the late texts, helped fix problems I didn't create, and said yes out of guilt more than willingness. At first, it felt good, useful, dependable, even admirable. But slowly, I began to resent the very people I once felt proud to serve. Not because they changed, but because I never told them where my line was. And the more I stayed silent, the more I disappeared from my own life. Burnout doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like quiet bitterness, like snapping at someone you care about, like sighing before every yes. Like avoiding the mirror because deep down, you know you're living someone else's priorities. And that silent erosion doesn't come from weakness. It comes from boundarylessness. From the belief that saying no makes you selfish, that protecting your energy is a betrayal, that rest must be earned. But none of that is true. Stoic wisdom teaches us to act according to nature, not the nature of people-pleasing, but the nature of self-governance. You are not here to be consumed by others. You are here to live with intention, to choose how your time and energy are spent. Marcus Aurelius spoke of doing what is right, not what is easy or expected. Epictetus reminded us that we are not responsible for what others demand, only for how we respond. And sometimes the most courageous response is refusal. Not rejection out of anger, but of self-respect. Boundaries are not walls, they are clear. They don't push people away, they teach them where you begin. And in doing so, they invite deeper connection, one that's built on truth, not obligation. When you set boundaries, you're not being cold. You're being clear. Clear that your energy is finite. Clear that your presence is not permission to be used. Clear that your soul is not a resource to be depleted. But setting boundaries isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It can sound like, I'm not available for that today. Or I need some time before I give you an answer. Or simply, no. Without apology. Without explanation. Because when you know your limits, you don't need to defend them, you embody them. And the people who matter will respect them, even if it takes time. Still, boundaries are not built once. They're practiced. They are a discipline. And like any discipline, they take time, repetition, and patience. Especially if you've spent years being of everyone but yourself. At first, the guilt will come. The fear of being misunderstood, of letting someone down, of not being who they've come to expect. But on the other side of that guilt is relief. And on the other side of that relief is freedom. Freedom to rest without explanation. Freedom to give from overflow, not obligation. Freedom to be whole without performing usefulness. That's where your soul begins to recover, not just from exhaustion, but from invisibility. Because when you set boundaries, you stop asking permission to be whole. You reclaim your time, your values, your space. And in doing so, you stop resenting others for taking what you never protected. If you're always tired, always secretly angry, always one request away from collapse, the problem isn't your capacity, it's your boundaries. You're not weak for needing space. You're not selfish for saying no. You're just finally realizing that you matter too. That your soul doesn't thrive in overcommitment, it fractures. That burnout isn't a badge of honor, it's a signal you've been ignoring yourself too long. So start small. One boundary, one honest answer. One moment of rest you don't justify. Let it feel uncomfortable, let it feel unfamiliar, but let it begin. Because the people who truly care about you don't just want access, they want you well. They want the version of you that's whole, steady, and not secretly drowning. And the only way to become that version is to stop giving everything away. You can't heal while you're constantly leaking. You can't find peace while you're pleasing everyone else into silence. You can't listen to your soul while trying to meet everyone's needs but your own. Peace doesn't arrive when everyone's satisfied. It arrives when you remember you're not responsible for everything that goes wrong. You're responsible for what you allow. And what you allow is what continues. So if you want peace, stop allowing what poisons it. Stop calling burnout dedication. Stop calling depletion generosity. Start calling it what it is, self-abandonment. Then choose something different. Choose protection. Choose steadiness. Choose boundaries. Not to keep people out, but to finally let yourself in. 6. Your soul needs presence, not perfection. You don't need to get it all right. You just need to be here, fully, truthfully, not performing, not adjusting, not running a mental checklist of how this moment should look, just here. Because the people around you don't remember your perfect execution. They remember your presence, your eyes when they spoke, your silence when they needed space, your warmth even when your words weren't polished. And yet, too often, we trade that quiet presence for the illusion of doing things correctly. Perfection is praised, it's rewarded, expected, and glorified. But it's not human, it's not alive, it has no breath. And chasing it slowly strips us of the very thing that makes life feel real. You can't be in the moment and judge it at the same time. You can't hold space for someone and worry about how you're being seen. You can't touch the soul of an experience if you're too busy trying to make it flawless. There's a subtle cost to always trying to get things right. You become distant from others, from yourself, from the present. Because when you're trying to perfect everything, you're not truly there for anything. Your child tells you a story, and you nod, but you're already thinking about how to reply. You cook a meal, but you're too focused on how it turns out to enjoy the act of creating. You walk outside, but forget to look up. That forgetting, it adds up. It becomes a life that's technically fine, but emotionally absent. The Stoics didn't strive for perfection. They aimed for virtue, consistent, grounded effort in alignment with reason. They didn't try to control every outcome. They focused on how they showed up within it. That shift is everything. Because once you stop trying to be perfect, you can start being honest. You can speak with sincerity instead of certainty. You can act from integrity instead of image. You can bring your full self to the moment, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. Presence means feeling the moment without needing to fix it. Letting someone cry without offering a solution. Sitting in your own discomfort without escaping into busyness. Listening to the wind through the window without needing to do anything at all. Presence is not performance, it's connection. And it begins the moment you allow yourself to show up, without needing to impress. So much of our stress doesn't come from what's happening. It comes from our need to manage how it appears. We overthink every word, every action, every outcome. And in doing so, we miss the only thing we ever really had. This moment, right here, as it is. The sound of someone's voice, the way sunlight moves across the floor, the beating of our own heart. These are the pieces of life we only catch when we're present enough to notice. Presence also means forgiving yourself in real time. Not replaying your mistakes 10 times. Not rewriting conversations in your head. Just owning the moment, learning, and moving forward. Perfection holds your past against you. Presence meets you where you are and walks with you. And that's what the soul needs. Not more pressure to be better, but more permission to just be. When you let go of perfection, you start to breathe differently. You stop waiting for the right mood to be kind. You stop waiting for the ideal conditions to be grateful. You stop waiting to feel ready to live the life that's already in front of you. You realize that presence doesn't need an audience. It just needs attention. Quiet, steady, open attention to what is. To who's with you. To what you're doing, even if it's small. Especially if it's small. There is nothing more powerful than someone fully present. You can feel it in the way they look at you, in the way they listen, in the way they don't flinch at silence. And somehow they're not thinking about being anywhere else. That kind of attention is rare. And it's healing. So if you're tired of trying to get everything right, stop. Shift your focus. Instead of trying to perfect your actions, try to be fully in them. Instead of rehearsing your words, mean them. Instead of checking off another task, live inside it. Let the moment be enough, not because it's ideal, but because it's real. Let the silence stretch a little longer. Let the emotions rise without rushing to tame them. Let the imperfection show without shrinking from it. Perfection is unreachable. Presence is always available. And when you stop trying to fix the moment, you finally feel it. That's what your soul is waiting for. Not for you to improve everything, but for you to return, to slow down, to soften, to feel. Life doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be awake. It asks you to notice. It asks you to stay when it's easier to escape. It asks you to show up, not because you have all the answers, but because you care enough to be real. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can offer. The quiet, complete, unfiltered presence of someone who's here. Not performing, not perfecting, just present. 7. Your soul needs grace, not guilt. Guilt has a purpose. It can wake you up. It can hold a mirror to the choices you'd rather forget. It can nudge you back toward integrity. But guilt is meant to be a guide, not a prison. And when you live in it too long, when you replay the same mistake over and over in your mind like a punishment on loop, it stops shaping you and starts breaking you. You carry the weight not just of what you did, but of who you fear you are because of it. But your soul wasn't built to carry that forever. At some point, guilt must give way to grace. Not to excuse what happened, but to stop letting it define you. You are not the worst thing you've done. You are not the words you wish you could take back or the silence you regret holding. You're a human being who's learning through imperfection, growing through error, and reaching toward better. Not because guilt shouts at you, but because something deeper whispers, you're still worthy. Yet the voice of guilt is loud. It tells you you're not trying hard enough, not apologizing well enough, not fixing it fast enough. It turns growth into a test you never pass. And over time, it turns self-awareness into self-punishment. You don't rest because you think you haven't earned it. You don't forgive yourself because you think that would mean forgetting. But it doesn't. Forgiveness is not forgetfulness. It's release. It's the choice to stop injuring yourself for something you've already survived. The Stoics didn't speak much about guilt the way modern culture does. They spoke of responsibility, of correction, of returning to reason. Marcus Aurelius didn't linger in shame. He examined his actions with clarity and moved forward with intention. Because self-harm, whether mental or emotional, doesn't make you more virtuous. It makes you less available to serve what matters now. The past can inform you, but it should never imprison you. You can tell when guilt has overstayed its purpose. It drains your energy instead of refining your choices. It makes you hide instead of repair. It makes you harsh instead of honest. You start confusing penance with growth, thinking the more you suffer, the more you'll change. But real growth doesn't require suffering. It requires understanding. It requires owning the pain, yes, but then choosing something better from it. Choosing not to repeat it. Choosing to rebuild with steadier hands. Grace isn't softness, it's strength without violence. It allows you to face what you did without falling apart. It creates space for responsibility and recovery to coexist. It says, yes, I did that. And no, it doesn't have to be who I remain. It doesn't deny the harm. It simply refuses to let guilt be your only teacher. Because at some point, your soul needs warmth. It needs someone, you, to say, you've done enough. You've learned enough. Now let's begin again. If you wake up every morning with regret in your chest, if you rehearse old failures like a script you can't rewrite, if you speak to yourself in ways you would never speak to someone you love, it's time to shift. Not with grand gestures, just with honest ones. A few minutes of silence, a few words on a page, a walk without distraction. Not to escape your guilt, but to remind yourself of your humanity. You're allowed to move forward. Even if someone hasn't forgiven you, even if you're still unsure how to make it right. You can live in a way now that honors the pain you caused without being trapped in it. That's what grace looks like. Not absolution, but evolution. And if you're holding guilt for something that's already far behind you, something that no longer reflects who you are, ask yourself, what would I rather carry? The weight of a past I can't change, or the strength of a future I can still shape? Grace doesn't let you off the hook. It puts you on the right one. It holds you accountable without holding you hostage. It gives you back your energy, your clarity, your power to act today. Not as a perfect person, but as a present one. And that presence is what your soul has been asking for. Not more punishment, but permission to breathe again. There will always be someone who remembers what you did. Let them. What matters more is that you remember who you've become. Not to erase the past, but to grow beyond it. The Stoics called this returning to the path. Not because you never left it, but because you always can. That's what a resilient life looks like. Not clean, but real. Not flawless, but faithful to the pursuit of inner integrity. If you've carried guilt for too long, set it down for a while. See how your heart feels without it crushing your ribs. You don't owe your suffering to anyone. You owe your soul something far more lasting. A return to stillness, to steadiness, to self-respect. And that return begins not with more guilt, but with grace. 8. Your soul needs depth, not distraction. You're not lost. You're just surrounded by too much noise to hear where you truly want to go. When every moment is filled, when every silence is patched with a screen, when every discomfort is avoided with more stimulation, the problem isn't direction, it's disconnection. You don't need more things to do. You need more space to feel. The soul doesn't ask for movement. It asks for meaning, and you can't reach meaning if you're always reaching for something to keep you distracted. Modern life rewards the surface. It gives instant rewards to shallow engagement. Scroll, click, switch, react. But while your mind is occupied, your spirit starves, because there's no depth in distraction. There's no wisdom in constant reaction. You begin to forget what your own thoughts sound like. You forget what matters when no one's watching. You forget how it feels to be still long enough to hear the truth you've been burying under busyness. Depth doesn't demand more, it demands less. Less noise, less rushing, less external chasing. It begins with subtraction. It begins when you stop trying to stay entertained and start learning how to stay present. When you let the discomfort rise instead of silencing it with a flick of your finger. When you pause not to find a task, but to find yourself again. The Stoics spoke often of depth not as knowledge accumulation, but as clarity of soul. Epictetus warned that constant distraction weakens character, making us reactive, fragile, and scattered. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations not to be overrun by what is outside, but to return inward, to reason, to purpose. Their lives were filled with chaos, wars, betrayal, responsibility, but their strength didn't come from escaping that chaos. It came from returning, again and again, to still thought, clear judgment, quiet intention. And yet we run, from silence, from simplicity, from slowness. Not because we want to, but because we've forgotten how not to. You check your phone without thinking. You open a new tab when the moment stretches too long. You add things to your list just to feel productive. But productivity without reflection is movement without meaning. You get somewhere, yes, but it's nowhere worth being. You don't need another app to manage your time. You need time that isn't managed, just lived. You don't need more input, you need a moment of stillness that doesn't end with a notification, because only in those unfiltered, uninterrupted moments does your soul speak up. It won't yell, it won't beg, it waits for the noise to drop. And then, if you're quiet enough, it asks the questions you've avoided. Questions that don't flatter your ego, but sharpen your truth. What are you pretending not to care about? What are you chasing that keeps you from returning to yourself? What emotion are you trying to avoid by staying busy? These aren't questions distraction wants you to ask. Because distraction thrives on avoidance. It feeds on your fear of facing the depth you hold but haven't dared to explore. But depth isn't overwhelming. It's steady. It doesn't ask for grand answers. It asks for presence, for consistency, for 5 quiet minutes without escape, for a walk without a podcast, for a conversation where you actually listen, not just wait to speak. Depth doesn't require that you change your life overnight. It only asks that you begin to live from the inside out, not from the outside in. And when you do, something subtle shifts. You stop reacting so fast. You stop reaching for external noise to numb internal tension. You begin to choose differently, not because someone told you to, but because you finally heard yourself think. That's what distraction steals. Not time, but self-awareness. Not energy, but intention. It replaces insight with impulse. It gives you a full day and an empty mind. So pause. Look at how often you reach for something. Your phone, your feed, your next task, when what you might really need is to sit with the quiet and let the discomfort pass. Because it will pass. And what remains is something more grounded, more honest, more you. The soul wasn't built for rapid switching. It was built for focused living, for steady practice, for a meaningful connection, for thoughtful reflection. These things don't happen by accident. They require choice. They require refusal. Not out of resistance, but out of reverence. For your time, for your attention, for your life. Depth is not dramatic, it's not loud, but it is life-giving. It reminds you that the goal isn't to keep up, but to come back. Not to do more, but to do what matters. Not to outrun emptiness, but to face it and transform it. You're not behind, you're not broken. You're just being pulled in too many directions to feel what's already there. You don't need to add more to find it. You need to remove what distracts, so what's meaningful can rise again. And it will, if you let it. If you stop, if you breathe, if you go deep, quietly, patiently, truthfully. Because what you're looking for isn't out there, it's under the noise. And your soul has known that all along. Your soul doesn't need more pressure. It needs permission to slow down, to feel, to return. Not to who you used to be, but to who you've always been beneath the noise, the roles, the chasing. Still, aware, anchored. If something inside you has felt lost lately, it may not be because you've strayed. It may be because you've been distracted. Not by laziness, but by too much. Too much noise, too many expectations, too little quiet. But clarity doesn't come through more doing. It comes through stillness, through presence, through the courage to look within. This is what Stoic wisdom reminds us, that peace is not the reward of perfection, but the result of living in alignment. That strength is not found in applause, but in restraint. That clarity begins when we stop trying to control and start listening. So wherever you are right now, pause, breathe. Let what's heavy fall, let what's real rise. Then share your story in the comments below. Not for validation, but to remind someone else that they're not alone. Because your soul doesn't need saving. It just needs space to speak. And maybe today, you finally made enough room to hear it.